Welcome to Meet the Leader. This is part 2 of our conversation with the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki. Enjoy watching.
Every leader in the world experiences moments of difficulty, and I believe you are no exception. Can you recall any specific crisis that in your leadership that stand as a moment that really tested you, and what lessons can be drawn out of that crisis?
Well, I don't know. I think maybe in 2005 we had to take a decision about the then deputy president of the ANC and deputy president of the country, the current president of South Africa, President Jacob Zuma, because there had been a court case. It was a court case about corruption. And in the remarks that the judge made in concluding that case, Jacob Zuma himself was not on trial, but in the remarks that he made, the judge said, I'm not quoting him directly, but that indeed Jacob Zuma had been involved in corrupt practices together with this person that was sentenced to 15 years or something. So the challenge therefore that we faced was that here we are as a country, we have a constitution which says separation of powers, the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and so on. And we as a government have to respect the decisions of the judiciary. And so this challenge arose as to what do we do. So in the end, we said, look, in order to sustain that as a government, we are the government, and we cannot be the first people to ignore what the courts are saying. We've got to show an example by respecting what the courts say. Therefore, in that context, it's better that we should relieve him of his responsibilities in government. It was not easy. It was difficult. It's not as though he had himself been put on trial and been found guilty, which would then become a straightforward case. But it was this determination made by this judge, which obviously then has a public impact. And as I say, we thought that as government, we must have the first responsibility to respect this constitutional setup and therefore respect what the courts are saying. So we acted like that. It was not very easy because this is the deputy president of the country, but of course later those charges were dropped against him. But it can't be an easy moment that you have to say to the deputy president of the republic, look, it's better that you step down. And let's wait until the courts sort out this matter in the finality. That was a difficult moment.
Okay. Your Excellency, you are the architect of New Economic Partnership for Africa, NEPAD, which actually is a socio-economic framework for Africa economic growth, which was adopted 2001. Now we are about 10 years past that initiative. In your view, has NEPAD met its objective, and what are some of the leadership lessons that can be drawn out of that?
I think in terms of putting on the table, on the African table, this development perspective, to say to all of us as a continent, look, these are the things that we must do. Yeah. I think it made a big contribution in terms of, therefore, putting into our common thinking a perspective about the African continent, which perspective remains to this day. I think the major challenge, well, let me say, one of the principal implementation agencies for this, they were conceived of as the regions, the regional economic communities, that would build towards this implementation of this All Africa policy program from below, as it were. So the regions become important. So when you talk about increasing African trade, for instance, let's build a regional partnership to increase our capacity to trade. Then you got to go to the region and say, well, what can we do in the region to achieve this? I think it's that implementation stage where I think we have not moved as fast as we should. It raises a larger question. It raises a larger question about what we do in order to implement policies that we've agreed to. So if you say, for instance, we must build this partnership, first of all among ourselves as Africans, to achieve this development, these socio-economic goals, and say what resources do we have in this region of our own that we can put together to build infrastructure so that people can move up and down and all of that. Again, you run into problems about the capacity to generate those sorts of resources as a region. So I would say that that's really been the challenge with regard to NEPAD. When we've said, for instance, we've agreed on all of these various programs to implement, whether it's agriculture or industry or development of universities and so on. Let's then find the resources among ourselves to do that. It becomes difficult. And at a certain stage, when we said a number of our countries have got pension funds, why don't we take some of these pension funds to use as Africa's own capital to invest in the programs that we've agreed? Again, you find you're not getting the sort of response that you would expect. Partly because you have some of these pension funds invested outside of the continent, or on the basis that the risk on the continent is too high. So better invest in other low-risk countries, because after all, this is pensioners' money. So I'm saying that you have challenges of that kind of the implementation of NEPAD. And even, you're quite right, it's a socio-economic program. So one of the issues that was raised in NEPAD was that you need to create the right conditions for development to take place. So for instance, we therefore have to address this matter of peace. So as NEPAD, we then had a lot of interaction with the rest of the world on the peace question. Now you have a situation to this day that our continent cannot finance its own peace operations. We say that here is a problem now in the Eastern Congo. Surely the African continent wants this problem solved. But I'm quite sure if they said tomorrow, let us send a battalion there, the money to finance that operation will come from outside of the continent. So I'm saying that this is a particular challenge. There's another problem that's arisen. We said this is a partnership among ourselves as Africans, first of all, so let's see what we do among ourselves. But it's also a partnership between Africa and the rest of the world. And indeed, we then engage the rest of the world to say, now, we want that you, the rest of the world, must construct your relationship with the continent on this basis, on the basis of what we as Africans have decided. So indeed it was agreed. So for instance, the G8 adopted what they call the G8 Africa Action Plan. It was based on NEPAD. They said, all right, we accept your proposal that from now onwards, we will behave on the continent within the context of what the continent itself has decided. Then they worked out the G8 Africa Action Plan on that basis. But over time, they made a commitment with regard to all of these various elements. This is what we'll do and so on. And we set up joint institutions to make sure that we monitor and evaluate what has been done and all that. But over time, they moved away with the result that today, that G8 Africa Action Plan has disappeared. So the base that had been established of cooperation between Africa and the developed world in particular, in terms of these economic relations, I'm saying it's disappeared because these developed countries moved away from it. So the basis for that partnership got eroded over time. So these will be some of the challenges that we're faced with regard to NEPAD, which our leadership on the continent must continue to address.
There's a feeling that Africa is marginalized at an international stage. To take the case of Libya, for example, I'm not sure whether what we see in Libya today was an ideal condition that Africa Union had wanted. Obviously, maybe NATO ignored AU recommendation then. To what extent you think Africa need to do to bring back its relevance on the international stage? Leadership response.
I think the Libyan experience,
Yeah.
and I think you are quite correct to refer to it. I think what really needs to happen is that our leadership on the continent needs seriously to sit down to assess that, to say what happened and why. Because clearly, as you know, the African Union had taken certain decisions about Libya, about how to solve this problem. They had engaged the late Colonel Gaddafi to say, as the African Union, this is what we're going to do to assist you people to solve the problem. And Gaddafi had agreed. Then the African Union consulted, communicated that to the Security Council to say, as a continent, this is what we're going to do. And the Security Council completely ignored what the continent had said and took their own decisions, which resulted in this intervention by NATO and so on. So I'm saying that to say, I think it'd be important for the continent to sit down and say what went wrong. What is it that emboldened even the Security Council to go against a decision formally taken by the African Union? And I think in terms of making that assessment, probably one of the conclusions that we probably would reach is that we need to strengthen the sense of cohesion on the continent. We need to act together in unity. Because you'll remember that what happened is that despite the fact that the African Union had taken the positions that it took on Libya, individual African countries broke away, as it were, and began to say their own things consistent with what Western countries were saying about Libya. And maybe that's what then encourages people to intervene on the continent when we're not united ourselves behind positions that we take. But I'm saying that I think it would be important for our leadership really to sit down and assess what happened. Because we had warned that, first of all, that we had agreed with the government of Libya, the AU had agreed with the government of Libya that indeed change was needed, that it was absolutely necessary to have a process of democratization take place, that it was important that the government of Libya should engage with the rebellion that had broken out, stop the shooting, and let people sit down, and the AU was ready to facilitate all of that, and matter was agreed. But nevertheless, I say the Security Council decided on its own thing. And the continent had foreseen that if you handle this thing in a particular way, in the way that it was actually handled, it would produce other consequences. So that today, you have a Libya which is very unstable. But also, you then have the consequences in Mali. again, the continent had said this, that you see, if you handle the matter in the way that was handled, one of the negative consequences would be the destabilization of the whole region, and particularly the Sahel. That was foreseen, and it was said. But I'm saying that for the continent to sit down and say what went wrong, why was this thing handled like this? And therefore, to the extent that what happened is as a result of our own weaknesses, to address this matter as to, let's identify those weaknesses and correct them. Because if we don't, we will have another operation of this kind in a situation in which the West, because of our weaknesses, feels emboldened to intervene on the continent in the way that it likes. But it is critical that as Africans, we really sit down and discuss this matter frankly.
You ran for ANC president for the third time. You attempted for the third time in 2007, and you lost to President Zuma as a president of ANC. But you accepted the result, and you moved on graciously. This is not very common in African politics. What can you share with existing and upcoming leaders on the need to accept results and move on and assist your country to move on?
I think that, of course, I think one of the things that is very critical in this matter is it's a reflection on the nature of one's political commitment.
Yes.
It is important that as African leaders, we must bear in mind that we are elected into these positions not to serve our own individual interests, but elected into these positions in order to serve the people. So you must, faced with a situation like that, you got to answer the question, what do I do that is correct, that would serve the interests of the country? No, not what do I do which serves my interests. But I think if you don't have that kind of political understanding, that kind of political commitment, that you are here as a servant of the people, then you'll get into this problem. When it's time to go, because you are serving yourself, you will resist to go, because you are not there to serve the people, and I think that is critical.
Time is running out. Maybe last question, Your Excellency. Which leader in the world inspired you most, or inspires you most? I mean, whether he's deceased, or she's deceased, or he or she's still with us?
Well, I think that you would have to, you'd have to talk about a number of leaders.
Maybe I give you two.
You have to talk about a number of leaders. Yeah. I mean, if you take, for instance, one of the people who influenced us greatly, in terms of our thinking about many things, would be the late Julius Nyerere. Very wise, very well grounded, but also very commitment to service, to serve the people and to serve the continent. And many of the things that he said are things that we would repeat today as being important.
The second?
There would be others. You see, we during the long period of this time in exile, we worked out of Zambia. And to look at the way the Zambians approached the matter of their contribution to the liberation of Southern Africa, and the readiness really to sacrifice everything to achieve this objective. So President Kaunda would be one of these people, but there are many.
Thank you. Viewers, thank you very much for tuning in. I'm sure you have learned a lot from the experience of the former President of the Republic of South Africa, His Excellency Thabo Mbeki. Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.